blizzard didn't ask permission before it swallowed Seoul whole. I pressed my forehead against the diner's frost-covered window, watching the world disappear under sheets of white. The snow came sideways now, angry and relentless, turning the neon signs across the street into blurred ghosts. My manager had locked up an hour ago, leaving me to finish the closing checklist alone. Standard procedure. I didn't mind the solitude. Then I heard it, a soft tapping against the glass door. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks, rattling the frame like it had been doing all night. But the tapping came again, weaker this time, almost apologetic. I grabbed the dish towel from my apron and wiped a circle in the condensation. An elderly woman stood outside, her thin frame trembling violently. She wore a gray coat that might have been expensive once, but the blizzard had soaked it through. Her silver hair clung to her pale face in wet strands, and her lips had taken on a frightening blue tint. She wasn't knocking anymore. She was holding herself up against the door, her eyes half closed. Every practical instinct I had screamed at me to walk away. The diner was closed. The buses had stopped running. The storm warnings had been blaring on every phone for the past 3 hours, telling people to shelter in place. Getting involved meant staying here all night. It meant using my own money for the heat I'd have to keep running. It meant explaining to my manager tomorrow why I'd broken protocol. But I'd spent too many nights cold and hungry in my life to ignore that look in her eyes. I unlocked the door, and the wind nearly ripped it from my hands. Snow rushed in like an invasion, covering the checkered floor in seconds. The woman stumbled forward, and I caught her before she collapsed. She weighed almost nothing, all fragile bones and soaked fabric. Her skin felt like ice against my hands. "I've got you," I said, though I wasn't sure she understood English. "Come on, let's get you warm." I guided her to the corner booth, the one with the ripped red vinyl that nobody wanted to sit in. She sank into it with a shuddering breath, her whole body convulsing with shivers. I grabbed every clean towel from behind the counter and wrapped them around her shoulders, then cranked the thermostat as high as it would go. The ancient heating system groaned to life, coughing out warm air that smelled like dust and oil. "Stay right here," I told her, already moving toward the kitchen. "I'm making you something hot." She tried to say something in Korean, her voice barely a whisper, but I was already pushing through the kitchen door. My hands moved on autopilot, filling a pot with water, clicking on the gas burner. I found a packet of instant ramyeon in the supply closet, the cheap kind we kept for staff meals. Not fancy, but hot and filling. While the noodles cooked, I shrugged off my jacket, the only real winter coat I owned. It wasn't much, just a thrift store find with a broken zipper, but it was thick and it was dry. I brought it back to the booth and draped it over her shoulders, on top of the towels. She looked up at me then, really looked at me, and something shifted in her expression. Her dark eyes were sharp despite the exhaustion, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched my wrist, her fingers like frozen twigs. "Gamsahamnida," she whispered. "Thank you." I squeezed her hand gently, then went back for the noodles. I placed the steaming bowl in front of her and watched as she cupped her hands around it, absorbing the warmth before even trying to eat. When she finally lifted the first bite to her mouth, her eyes closed in relief. Outside, the storm howled louder, throwing snow against the windows like it was furious at being kept out. The streetlights flickered once, twice, then surrendered to the dark. The diner's lights held, but barely, casting everything in a dim yellow glow that made the world beyond the glass look like another planet. I should have been scared. I should have been calculating the cost of this decision, the risk of staying here alone with a stranger in a blizzard. But as I watched this woman slowly come back to life, color returning to her cheeks with each spoonful of broth, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. I pulled up a chair across from her and settled in for the long night, completely unaware that the storm outside was nothing compared to what would arrive with the morning sun. I must have dozed off sometime around 4 in the morning. When I opened my eyes, weak gray light was filtering through the windows, and the storm had finally exhausted itself. The woman, Mrs. Han, I would later learn, was asleep in the booth, her head resting against my wadded-up jacket. Her breathing was steady now, peaceful. The towels had fallen to her lap, and I carefully pulled them back up around her shoulders. My back screamed in protest as I stood up from the chair. I'd spent the whole night in that position, keeping watch like some kind of guardian. My manager was going to kill me for running the heat all night. The electric bill alone would probably cost me a week's tips. I was halfway to the coffee maker, desperate for caffeine, when I heard them. Engines. Multiple engines. The deep, expensive purr of vehicles that didn't belong in this neighborhood. I moved to the window and wiped away the new layer of condensation. My blood went cold. 6 black SUVs had pulled up outside the diner, arranged in a formation that blocked the entire street. They were identical, sleek and menacing, their dark windows reflecting nothing but snow and sky. As I watched, men in black suits stepped out of each vehicle, moving with military precision. They weren't police. Police didn't move like that, didn't dress like that, didn't drive cars that probably cost more than my life. The lead SUV's back door opened and a man stepped out. I'd grown up in Detroit, had seen my share of dangerous men. Gang members with dead eyes and quick triggers, dealers who smiled while they ruined lives, men who wore their violence like cologne. I thought I knew what danger looked like. I was wrong. This man was danger itself, distilled and refined into human form. He stood, maybe 6 feet tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn onto his body. His black hair was styled back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so terrifying. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from stone, and eyes that scanned the diner with the cold calculation of a predator. Han Jae-Sung. I didn't know his name yet, but I would never forget that first look. He moved toward the diner with absolute confidence, his men flanking him like shadows. I noticed the bulges under their jackets, the way their hands hovered near their hips. These weren't businessmen. These were soldiers. My hands were shaking as I backed away from the window. I should run. I should grab my things and disappear out the back door before they came in. Every survival instinct I'd honed over 26 hard years was screaming at me to get out. But Mrs. Han was still asleep in the booth, vulnerable and trusting. The door opened without a knock, without permission. The man in the charcoal suit stepped inside, and the temperature in the diner seemed to drop despite the heat I'd been running all night. His eyes swept the room in a single efficient scan, taking in everything: the overturned chairs on tables, the empty coffee pots, the melted snow by the entrance. Then his gaze found the corner booth, and his entire body went rigid. He crossed the diner in 4 long strides, his men spreading out behind him to cover every exit. I found myself between him and the booth, my body moving before my brain caught up. It was suicide. I knew it was suicide, but I couldn't just stand aside. "Please," I said, hating how my voice shook. "She's sleeping. She was out in the storm. I was just helping her." He looked at me for the first time, really looked at me, and I felt the full weight of his attention like a physical thing. His eyes were dark, impossibly dark, with depths that suggested things I didn't want to imagine. There was no warmth in them, no mercy, no humanity I could appeal to. "Move," he said. His voice was quiet, almost soft, but it carried absolute authority. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said, even though every cell in my body was telling me to obey. "I just gave her food and kept her warm. That's all. She can go now. We can all just forget this happened." Something flickered across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite curiosity. "Move," he repeated. I stepped aside, because standing between him and that booth any longer was just stupid bravery, the kind that got people killed. He moved past me, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne and something else, something metallic that made my stomach turn. He stopped at the booth, looking down at the sleeping woman. His expression changed then, shifting into something I couldn't read. One of his men approached, speaking rapidly in Korean, but the man in the charcoal suit held up a hand for silence. Then he did something that shocked me more than anything else that morning. He knelt down beside the booth, careful not to wake her, and gently brushed a strand of gray hair from her face. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with everything else about him, that I felt my entire understanding of the situation shift. Mrs. Han's eyes fluttered open. She looked confused for a moment, then focused on the man's face. Her expression melted into something like relief and love and exasperation all mixed together. "Jae-Sung, ah," she said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. He caught her hand, pressing it between both of his, and spoke to her in Korean. His voice had changed completely, gentle now, almost breaking. She responded, her words coming faster, and I caught her gesturing toward me. The man, Jae-Sung, looked at me again. This time, his expression was different. Calculating. Measuring. His mother said something else, and his jaw tightened. He stood slowly, his full attention now fixed on me like a spotlight I desperately wanted to escape. He said something in Korean to his men, and two of them immediately moved to the booth, carefully helping Mrs. Han to her feet. She was wrapped in my coat, I noticed, and was still holding one of the diner towels. "What is your name?" he asked me. His English was perfect, barely accented. "Keisha," I said. Then, because I was apparently determined to die today, I added, "Keisha Robinson." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze moving from my scuffed sneakers to my worn apron to my face. I felt exposed, like he was reading every secret I'd ever kept, every mistake I'd ever made, every desperate choice that had led me to this moment. "He stayed with her all night," he said. "It wasn't a question. The storm was bad, she needed help. You gave her your coat, she was cold, you fed her. She was hungry." I was getting defensive now, my fear transforming into irritation. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but I was just trying to help an old woman who is going to freeze to death. I don't want money, I don't want anything. She's safe now, so you can all just go." The corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been a smile on someone else, but on him it looked like a warning. "My mother," he said slowly, "is the only person in this world I value above my own life. Last night, she left the house while my guards were changing shifts. She has dementia. She gets confused, wanders. By the time we realized she was gone, the storm had already started." My heart sank as understanding crashed over me. "Oh God. We have been searching for her for 9 hours, he continued, his voice dropping even lower, more dangerous. 9 hours in that storm, expecting to find her body frozen in an alley. Instead, I find her warm, fed, and sleeping peacefully in a stranger's coat." He took a step closer, and I forced myself not to back away. His men were watching us with predatory focus, hands still hovering near their weapons. Mrs. Han was speaking urgently to one of them, but they were focused on their boss, waiting for his signal. "You are aware," he said quietly, "that I could offer you any amount of money for what you did, and it would still be an insult." "I don't want money," I repeated, though my voice came out smaller this time. "I know." He tilted his head slightly, still studying me with that unnerving intensity. "That is precisely why you are coming with us." The world tilted sideways. "What?" "My mother requires constant care. Her previous caregivers either stole from us or failed to notice when she left the house. You stayed awake all night keeping watch over a stranger in a storm. You gave her your only coat. You spent your own money on heat and food for someone you had never met." His eyes hardened. "I need someone I can trust with her life. I need someone who acts without expecting a reward. I need you." "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not. I have a job. I have a life. You can't just take people." "Yes," he said simply. "I can." Two of his men moved toward me, and panic flooded my system. I looked desperately at Mrs. Han, who was watching the scene with worried eyes. She said something sharp in Korean, and Jae-Sung responded without looking away from me. "My mother says I am frightening you," he translated. "She is correct. But understand this. Keisha Robinson, I am the most dangerous man in this city. My enemies would do anything to hurt me, and the fastest way to hurt me is through her." He gestured toward his mother. "You have already proven you will protect her without knowing who she is, without knowing what it might cost you. That makes you the only person I can trust to keep her alive." "This is kidnapping," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just take me." "I am not taking you." His voice remained calm, reasonable, which somehow made it worse. "I am offering you a position. You will live in my home, care for my mother, and in return, you will have protection, compensation, and anything you require." "And if I say no?" The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Then you leave this diner, return to your life, and hope that my enemies never learn that you are the woman who saved Han Jae-Sung's life." Hope that they never decide you are a loose end worth tying up. Hope that they never wonder if I might be grateful enough to someone to make them a target. It was the kindest threat I'd ever heard. He wasn't saying he would hurt me. He was saying that by saving his mother, I'd already painted a target on my back. The only safe place left was under his protection. I looked at Mrs. Han again. She had moved closer, reaching out to take my hand. Her grip was warm now, no longer ice cold. She smiled at me, said something in Korean that sounded like a plea. "She is asking you to come," Jae-Sung translated. "She says you have a good heart. She says she feels safe with you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision crushing down on me. I thought about my studio apartment with its broken heater and peeling walls. I thought about my manager who paid me under the table and shorted my hours. I thought about walking home alone every night through streets that got more dangerous every year. I thought about being cold and hungry and invisible, just another face in a city that didn't care if I lived or died. And I thought about this frail woman who had stumbled into my diner during a blizzard, who had looked at me with gratitude and trust, who was asking me to stay. "Fine," I said, opening my eyes to meet Jae-Sung's unreadable gaze. "But I want it in writing, and I want a salary. A real one." That almost smile appeared again. "You will have both, and much more, whether you want it or not." He nodded to his men, who immediately moved to escort Mrs. Han toward the door. She clutched my coat tightly, looking back at me to make sure I was following. I grabbed my backpack from behind the counter, the sum total of my important possessions fitting easily in one bag. As I walked toward the door, Jae-Sung fell into step beside me. "One rule," he said quietly, his voice meant only for me. "You keep my mother alive and safe, and I will burn this city to the ground for you. You fail, through negligence or betrayal, and you will learn exactly why I'm feared." I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But as I stepped out of that diner into the morning light, leaving behind the only life I'd known, all I could think was that I'd finally found something worth protecting. Even if it meant becoming property of Seoul's most feared mafia boss. The snow had stopped falling, but the city looked different now, transformed and dangerous. As I climbed into the back of the lead SUV, sitting beside Mrs. Han, who immediately took my hand again, I watched the diner disappear behind us. I didn't know it then, but I would never go back to that life. The woman I'd been, the waitress who kept her head down and survived on scraps, was gone. The woman I was becoming would have to be stronger, smarter, and far more dangerous than I ever imagined. Because in Han Jae-Sung's world, kindness wasn't weakness. It was the sharpest blade of all. The Han estate rose from the city like a fortress disguised as a palace. We'd driven for 40 minutes through neighborhoods that got progressively cleaner, quieter, richer, until the SUV turned through iron gates that probably cost more than every building I'd ever lived in combined. The mansion itself was modern glass and steel, all sharp angles and dark windows that reflected nothing but sky. Beautiful and cold, like everything else in Jae-Sung's world. Mrs. Han had fallen asleep again during the drive, her head resting against my shoulder. I'd stayed still, afraid to wake her, while Jae-Sung sat across from us in silence. He'd spent the entire ride on his phone, speaking rapid Korean in that quiet, deadly voice. I caught glimpses of the conversations through his tone alone. Threats, orders, reassurances. The voice of a man used to being obeyed without question. When we finally stopped, he ended his call and looked at me directly. "You will have your own suite, adjacent to my mother's rooms. Someone will bring your things from your apartment. I didn't give you my address. I know your name. That is enough." He said it without arrogance, just stating a fact. Of course he could find me. He could probably find anyone. The front entrance opened before we reached it, and suddenly I was surrounded by staff. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes took Mrs. Han gently from me, speaking to her in soothing Korean. Two younger women appeared with clothes draped over their arms, their expressions carefully neutral as they looked me over. A man in a butler's uniform stood at attention, waiting for instructions. I felt like I'd stepped onto a movie set. Nothing about this was real. Nothing about this could be my life. "Take her to the East Wing," Jae-Sung ordered. "Show her everything. Make sure she understands the security protocols." He turned to me, and for just a moment his expression softened into something almost human. "My mother will want to see you for dinner. Until then, rest, eat, you look exhausted." I was exhausted. I'd been awake for almost 24 hours, running on adrenaline and bad coffee. But as the staff moved to escort me away, Mrs. Han reached back and caught my hand. She said something in Korean, her voice firm despite her tiredness. Jae-Sung translated, though his jaw tightened as he spoke. "She says you saved her life. She says a debt of blood can never be repaid with money. She says you are family now." Family. The word hit me harder than I expected. I'd left my family behind in Detroit, running from a past I couldn't fix. I'd been alone for 3 years, keeping everyone at arm's length, convinced that solitude was safer than connection. Now this woman I'd known for less than 12 hours was claiming me as family, and her terrifying son was nodding slowly, as if his mother had just pronounced a sentence he had no choice but to enforce. "Family," he repeated, his dark eyes boring into mine. "That means you are under my protection. It also means betrayal will be answered with blood. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. I'd been promoted from kidnapping victim to family member, which somehow felt even more dangerous. Because family in his world wasn't about love or comfort, it was about loyalty and consequences. "I understand," I said. He studied me for another long moment, then nodded once. "Good. Welcome to your new life, Keisha Robinson. I hope you survive it." My suite was bigger than my entire apartment had been. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a garden that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. The bathroom had heated floors and a tub large enough to swim in. The closet was already filled with clothes in my exact size, designer labels I'd only seen in magazine ads. Someone had even stocked the mini-fridge with American snacks. Reese's Cups, Doritos, root beer. They'd done their homework on me. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like being studied by something hungry. I'd barely finished showering when a knock came at the door. The woman who'd taken Mrs. Han earlier stood in the hallway, smiling warmly. "I am Minji," she said in careful English. "Mrs. Han's primary nurse. She asks for you." I followed her through corridors that felt designed to intimidate. Every surface gleamed, every painting looked priceless. We passed rooms with doors slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of a life I couldn't comprehend. A study with walls of leather-bound books, a sitting room with furniture that belonged in a museum, a dining hall with a table that could seat 30. Mrs. Han's suite was different, warm, personal. Photos covered every surface. A younger version of her with a handsome man who must have been her husband, a small boy with serious eyes who would grow up to be Jae-Sung, family gatherings filled with laughter and life. This room held the ghost of who they'd been before violence became the family business. Mrs. Han sat in a chair by the window, dressed in fresh clothes, her silver hair neatly combed. She brightened when she saw me, reaching out both hands. I took them, and she pulled me down to sit beside her. "Gamsahamnida," she said again, then launched into a stream of Korean that Minji translated. "She wants you to know she is sorry for frightening you this morning. She did not mean to cause trouble. She sometimes forgets where she is, who the dangerous people are. Last night, she only knew she was cold and you were kind." "It's okay," I said, squeezing her hands gently. "I'm just glad you're safe." Mrs. Han studied my face with those sharp eyes, then said something else. Minji hesitated before translating. "She says you have sad eyes. She asks what you are running from." The question cut deeper than I expected. "Nothing," I lied. "Just looking for a fresh start." Mrs. Han shook her head, clearly not buying it. She spoke again, and this time, Minji's expression turned sympathetic as she translated. "She says her son also has sad eyes. She says maybe you understand each other better than you think. She says broken people recognize broken people." I didn't know how to respond to that. Before I could try, the door opened without warning, and 3 men walked in. Not Jae-Sung's staff. These were different. Harder. They moved with the casual confidence of predators, their suits unable to disguise the violence in their postures. The leader was tall and thin, with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw. He smiled when he saw me, but there was nothing friendly in it. "So this is the famous savior," he said in perfect English. "The waitress who made our boss go soft." Minji stood immediately, placing herself between us and Mrs. Han. You should not be here. These are private quarters. We go where we want, the scarred man said, his smile widening. We're family after all, part of the organization. His eyes never left me. I'm Choi Dae-jung, head of security. These are my associates, Park and Lim. We wanted to meet the woman who's suddenly so important to Mr. Han. The way he said important made my skin crawl. This wasn't a welcome. This was a threat dressed up as courtesy. Nice to meet you, I said, standing slowly. I'm just here to help with Mrs. Han. Just here to help, he repeated, moving closer. That's sweet. Really sweet. But let me give you some advice, new girl. In this house, loyalty is everything. Mr. Han may think you're special because you fed his mother some noodles, but to us, you're a liability, an outsider who hasn't earned her place. Park, the stockier of the two associates, cracked his knuckles deliberately. Accidents happen in big houses like this. The door slammed open hard enough to crack against the wall. Jae-Sung stood in the doorway, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Jae-Sung didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Choi Dae-jung, and the scarred man's cocky smile evaporated like water on hot steel. Out, Jae-Sung said quietly. Now. Choi and his associates moved toward the door, but the scarred man paused as he passed me. We'll talk again, he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. Choi. Jae-Sung's voice stopped him cold. You will not speak to her. You will not look at her. You will not breathe in her direction without my explicit permission. If I find out you violated this order, I will personally remove every finger you've ever used to threaten someone weaker than yourself. Am I clear? The scarred man's jaw worked, but he nodded stiffly. Crystal clear, boss. When they were gone, Jae-Sung turned to his mother, his expression softening instantly. They spoke in rapid Korean, her voice scolding, his defensive. She gestured at me several times, clearly upset about what had just happened. Finally, she grabbed his hand and pulled him down to sit beside her, speaking more gently now. Minji translated quietly for me. She is telling him the story about her husband, Jae-Sung's father. Mrs. Han's eyes had gone distant, lost in memory. She spoke slowly, and Minji's translation came in careful phrases. Mr. Han was a good man once, a business owner, legitimate. But Seoul was different 30 years ago. The gangs controlled everything. Protection money, territory disputes, violence as currency. When Mr. Han refused to pay, they burned his warehouse. When he went to the police, they laughed. So he made a choice. He joined the organization that had tried to destroy him, and he climbed until he controlled it instead. Jae-Sung's expression had gone carefully blank, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists. Mrs. Han continued, her voice breaking slightly. He became what he needed to become to protect his family. But the violence changed him. Every year he was a little colder, a little harder. By the time Jae-Sung was 10, his father barely smiled. By 15, he'd stopped coming home for dinner. At 20, Jae-Sung inherited an empire built on blood, and his father's dying words were, never show weakness, never trust anyone. She reached up and touched her son's face, tears sliding down her wrinkled cheeks. My boy learned too well. He built walls so high that even I cannot reach him sometimes. He trusts no one because trust got his father killed. He loves no one because love is a weapon his enemies can use. Minji's voice wavered as she translated the next part. But last night, when I was lost in the storm, confused and frightened, a stranger chose kindness over safety. She gave me her coat, her food, her time. She asked nothing in return. She expected nothing. And when my son found us, she stood between him and me, protecting a woman she'd just met from a man who terrifies grown soldiers. Mrs. Han looked at me now, her eyes bright with emotion. You reminded him that goodness still exists, that not everyone is a threat or a transaction. You showed him what he's forgotten in all these years of survival. I didn't know what to say. The weight of her words pressed down on me like a physical thing. This wasn't about me being some kind of hero. I'd just been a waitress who couldn't walk away from someone in need. But somehow that simple act had become something bigger, something I wasn't sure I was equipped to handle. Jae-Sung stood abruptly, his face unreadable. He spoke to his mother in Korean, his voice tight, then turned to leave. Wait, I said before I could stop myself. He paused, looking back at me. Your men, the ones who were just here, are they going to be a problem? Something flickered in his dark eyes. Respect, maybe, or surprise that I'd had the guts to ask. They're a problem I'll handle. You don't need to worry about Choi and his crew. But they're right, aren't they? I'm an outsider. I haven't earned my place here. To them, I'm just some random woman you brought home because of one good deed. To them, he said slowly, you are whatever I say you are. And I say you are family. That makes you untouchable. He moved closer, and I forced myself not to step back. My father's mistake was trusting the wrong people. I won't make that error. You've already proven your character in ways that matter more than years of service. 3 weeks passed in a strange rhythm. Days spent with Mrs. Han, learning her routines, her favorite foods, the stories she told when the dementia let her remember. Nights spent alone in my gilded cage, listening to the estate settle around me like a sleeping beast. I saw Jae-Sung only in passing, a glimpse in the hallway, his voice behind closed doors, the sound of his car leaving at odd hours. Then came the night everything shifted. I couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the silence too complete. Back in my apartment, I'd fallen asleep to sirens and shouting, the familiar soundtrack of survival. Here the quiet felt oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. I pulled on a robe and padded downstairs, thinking I'd make tea in the kitchen I'd discovered during my careful exploration of the estate. The kitchen was massive, all stainless steel and marble, equipped like a restaurant. I found the kettle, filled it, and was reaching for the tea when I heard the side entrance open. Footsteps, uneven and heavy. Then a muttered curse in Korean. Jae-Sung appeared in the doorway and my breath caught. His white shirt was torn and stained dark with blood. He had one hand pressed against his ribs, and when he saw me, he froze. You should be asleep, he said, his voice tight with pain. You should be in a hospital, I shot back, already moving toward him. The waitress instincts kicked in. Assess the situation, help the person in need, ask questions later. It's nothing. A disagreement that got physical. I've had worse. He tried to wave me off, but the movement made him wince. Sit down before you fall down. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen island. Now. Something in my tone made him obey, which surprised us both. He lowered himself carefully onto the chair while I wet some clean towels and grabbed the first aid kit I'd noticed under the sink during my first week. This is unnecessary, he said as I approached. Minji can handle it in the morning. Minji takes care of your mother. I take care of idiots who get stabbed and then act like it's no big deal. I lifted his shirt carefully, and he hissed through his teeth. The wound ran along his left side, not deep enough to be fatal, but deep enough to need stitches. Who did this? Business rivals. They made their point. I made mine harder. His eyes followed my hands as I cleaned the wound with steady efficiency. You're good at this. Detroit teaches you to handle knife wounds. You learn, or you don't survive. I kept my voice clinical, professional, even though being this close to him made my pulse race in ways I didn't want to examine. This needs proper stitches. I can butterfly it closed, but you really should see a doctor. No doctors, no records, no evidence. He was watching my face now, studying me with that unnerving intensity. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Most people are. I met his eyes as I applied butterfly bandages with careful precision. Most people didn't spend a night keeping your mother alive. Most people don't know you put her photos in every room of this house so she never feels alone. Most people don't hear you checking on her at 3 a.m. when you think no one's awake. His expression shifted, surprise cracking through the usual mask. You hear that? The walls are thick, but not that thick. And I'm a light sleeper. I finished the last bandage and sat back. There, keep it clean, change the dressing twice a day, and for God's sake stop getting into knife fights. I'll add it to my schedule. That almost smile appeared, the one I was starting to recognize as his version of humor. Between 10 a.m. negotiations and 3 p.m. territory disputes, I'll pencil in avoid sharp objects. I surprised myself by laughing. It felt strange, laughing in a kitchen at 2 a.m. with a bleeding Mafia boss, but also weirdly normal. Like we were just two people, not predator and prey, not boss and employee, not captor and captive. Thank you, he said quietly, the humor fading into something more genuine. For this, for my mother, for not running when most people would have. Where would I run to? I asked, starting to clean up the bloody towels. You own half the city. I do, but I've never used that power to keep someone who truly wanted to leave. He stood carefully, testing his side. The truth is, Keisha, you could walk out that door right now and I wouldn't stop you. I'd protect you from a distance, make sure you were safe, but I wouldn't force you to stay. The words hung between us like a challenge. I could leave. I could go back to my life of barely surviving, of cold apartments and colder prospects. Or I could stay in this golden fortress with a woman who called me family, and a man who was starting to feel less like a monster and more like something dangerously human. I'm not leaving, I heard myself say. Not yet, anyway. His smile was real this time, small but genuine, and it transformed his entire face. For just a moment, I saw the boy in the photos, before violence and survival had carved away everything soft. Good, he said. I'd miss our midnight medical sessions. The storm came exactly 6 weeks after I'd arrived at the estate. Not snow this time, but rain that hammered the windows like bullets and wind that screamed through the gardens. Mrs. Han had been agitated all evening, pacing her room, muttering about storms and danger. I'd finally gotten her to sleep around midnight, exhausted from trying to calm her. I was dozing in the chair beside her bed when the lights went out. Not flickering. Not a brownout. Complete, sudden darkness that felt deliberate. Wrong. My body reacted before my brain caught up, years of survival instincts kicking in. I moved to Mrs. Han's bed silently, touching her shoulder. She woke with a start, confused and frightened in the dark. Shh, I whispered, pulling her up gently. We need to move. Quietly. I didn't know why I was so certain something was wrong. Maybe it was the way the darkness felt intentional, or the sudden absence of the usual sounds. No generators kicking in, no guards checking in, no movement in the hallway. The silence was the kind that preceded violence. Mrs. Han seemed to sense it too. Despite her confusion, she didn't argue, just clutched my hand as I led her out of the bedroom. I'd spent 6 weeks memorizing this house, learning its rhythms and hiding places the way I'd once learned the back streets of Detroit. There was a storage room on the 2nd floor, windowless and lockable from the inside, that the staff used for linens, small enough to miss in a quick search. We made it halfway down the hall when I heard them. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision through the lower floor. Voices speaking in harsh whispers. The distinctive click of weapons being checked. I pulled Mrs. Han into an alcove, pressing us both against the wall, my hand over her mouth. 3 men passed us in the darkness, their silhouettes barely visible. Not Jae-Sung's men. These moved differently, with the aggressive confidence of invaders rather than the careful alertness of guards. When they passed, I guided Mrs. Han quickly toward the service stairs, the ones the staff used that most people forgot existed. My heart hammered so hard I thought they'd hear it, but my hands were steady. This was just like working the late shift in bad neighborhoods. Stay calm, stay aware, keep moving. We reached the storage room, and I locked us inside just as I heard an explosion somewhere below. Gunfire followed, rapid bursts that made Mrs. Han whimper. I pulled her down behind a stack of mattresses, creating a barrier between us and the door. We're okay, I whispered, though I had no idea if that was true. We're safe here. She grabbed my face with both hands, forcing me to look at her in the darkness. Even terrified and confused, her eyes were sharp. She said something in Korean, urgent and fierce. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning. Stay alive, protect yourself, don't die for an old woman. Not happening, I whispered back. We're both getting through this. The gunfire intensified. Shouts echoed through the house, some in Korean, some in languages I didn't recognize. I heard Jae-Sung's voice, cold and commanding, issuing orders. Then more gunfire, closer now. Footsteps pounded past our door. Someone tried the handle, rattling it hard. Mrs. Han pressed her face into my shoulder, and I wrapped my arms around her, making myself as large as possible, as if I could shield her through sheer will. Already checked that one, a voice said in accented English. Just linens, keep moving. The footsteps receded. I didn't dare breathe. The battle seemed to last hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, the gunfire stopped. The shouts faded. Heavy silence fell, broken only by the rain still hammering the windows. I stayed frozen, unwilling to move until I was certain. Mrs. Han had fallen asleep against me, exhaustion and shock pulling her under. I held her and waited, counting my heartbeats, watching the door. Then I heard it. Jae-Sung's voice, closer now, sharp with panic. Find them. Search every room. Find my mother and Keisha. Now. I stood carefully, settling Mrs. Han against the mattresses, and moved to the door. My hands shook as I unlocked it, suddenly uncertain. What if it wasn't over? What if this was a trick? I opened the door a crack, peering out into the hallway now lit by emergency lights. Blood stained the carpet. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air. Here, I called out, my voice hoarse. We're here. Jae-Sung appeared at the end of the hallway so fast he must have been running. His suit was torn. Blood splattered across his face and chest. Not his own, I thought. His eyes found mine, and something in his expression cracked open. Raw relief replacing the usual careful control. He reached us in seconds, pushing past me to check on his mother, his hands gentle despite the violence still clinging to him. You want me to wear what? I stared at the dress hanging in my closet, like it might attack me. Black silk that probably cost more than a year's rent, cut to hug every curve, with a slit that went dangerously high up the thigh. Minji smiled patiently. Mr. Han insists. Tonight is important. You must look the part. The part of what? A femme fatale? I'm a waitress who babysits his mother, not some kind of underworld queen. Tonight, you are both. She held up strappy heels that could double as weapons. The gala is where the families gather. Business, alliances, power plays, all disguised as charity. Mr. Han wants everyone to see you, to know you are under his protection. After the attack 2 weeks ago, Jae-Sung had become obsessive about security. New guards, new protocols, cameras in every hallway. And apparently this gala, where he would publicly claim me as part of his inner circle. Make me a target so visible that attacking me would be a direct declaration of war. The logic was sound. The execution terrified me. I put on the dress because refusing felt childish, and the woman who looked back at me from the mirror was a stranger. The silk transformed my waitress-worn body into something elegant and dangerous. Minji had done my makeup, subtle but striking, and my hair fell in dark waves over bare shoulders. Mrs. Han appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright with approval. She'd had a good day, lucid and present, and seemed excited about the evening, despite not being able to attend. She said something in Korean, reaching out to touch the fabric of my dress, then my cheek, her expression warm and proud. She says you look beautiful. Minji translated softly. Like a daughter she always wanted. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Tell her thank you. Tell her I'll take care of her son tonight. Mrs. Han laughed at the translation, said something else that made Minji blush. She says her son is the one who will need protecting from himself, that he won't be able to think straight when he sees you. That's not the goal here, I muttered, but my cheeks warmed. Jae-Sung was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in a tuxedo that made him look like violence wrapped in expensive fabric. When he saw me, he went completely still, his dark eyes tracking my descent with an intensity that made my breath catch. You clean up well, I said, trying to break the tension. So do you. His voice was rougher than usual. He offered his arm, formal and old-fashioned. Stay close to me tonight. Don't accept drinks from anyone. Don't go anywhere alone. If someone makes you uncomfortable, tell me immediately. You're really selling this fun evening out. His almost smile appeared. It's not meant to be fun. It's meant to send a message. You survived an attack that killed 3 of my men. You protected my mother using nothing but intelligence and quick thinking. The families need to understand that you're not just some random civilian. You're mine. The possessive mine should have bothered me. Instead, it sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. The gala was held at a hotel that made the Han estate look modest. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, women in gowns that cost more than cars, men in tuxedos hiding guns and knives, and decades of violence behind polished smiles. The charity was for orphans, which felt obscene given that half the people here probably created orphans as part of their business model. Jason kept me at his side, one hand resting possessively on the small of my back. People stared, whispered. I caught fragments of conversation in English and Korean, none of it friendly. The waitress. African nobody. How long before she disappears? Ignore them, Jason murmured. They're vultures circling something they don't understand. And what's that? Someone who earned her place through character rather than bloodline or fear. He guided me toward a group of older men in expensive suits, their bodyguards hovering nearby. Time to meet the sharks. The introductions were a blur of names and titles, each man sizing me up like I was livestock at auction. Most barely acknowledged me beyond a dismissive glance. One, a fat man with cold eyes named Director Kim, was more direct. "So this is the famous savior," he said in perfect English, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Tell me, Miss Robinson, what's it like living in the house of Seoul's most dangerous man? Do you sleep well at night knowing what he does in the shadows?" "Better than I slept in my apartment," I said evenly. "At least the heat works." Several men laughed, surprised by my directness. Kim's smile tightened. "Charming. But charm doesn't last long in our world. Eventually you'll see what he really is, and you'll run screaming." Jae-Sung's hand tightened on my back, a warning, but I stepped forward slightly. "I've already seen what he is. A son who loves his mother enough to tear the city apart looking for her. A man who keeps his word even when it's inconvenient. Someone who values loyalty over fear." I met Kim's cold stare without blinking. "In Detroit, we had plenty of men like you, all talk, using intimidation because they had nothing else. He's not that, neither am I." The silence that followed was deafening. Then one of the other men, younger with sharp features, started clapping slowly. "I like her, Jae-Sung. She has fire." "She has more than that," Jae-Sung said quietly, pride evident in his voice. "She has something none of us have anymore: integrity." Kim's expression turned ugly. "We'll see how long that lasts." The terrace was quieter than the ballroom, just the muted sounds of the party inside and the distant hum of Seoul at night. I'd excused myself to get air after 2 hours of navigating shark-infested social waters, and Jae-Sung had reluctantly allowed it, stationing 2 guards at the entrance. I was leaning against the railing, trying to process the evening, when a voice spoke from the shadows. "You handled Kim well. Not many people stand up to him like that." I spun around. A man stepped into the light, younger than most of the attendees, maybe early 30s, with the kind of handsome face that belonged on magazine covers. His tuxedo was impeccable, his smile warm and disarming. Everything about him screamed danger disguised as charm. "I'm sorry, have we met?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Not formally. I'm Lee Min-ho. I run the Eastern Territories." He moved closer, hands in his pockets, casual and unthreatening. "I wanted to meet the woman who's captured Han Jae-Sung's attention. That's no small feat." "I haven't captured anything. I'm just taking care of his mother." "Is that what you tell yourself?" His smile widened. "Come now, Miss Robinson. We both know you're more than a caregiver. You survived an attack that killed trained guards. You've become his weakness, whether he admits it or not." The word weakness made my stomach turn. "If you're trying to threaten me, you should know that Jae-Sung's guards are right inside." "Threaten you? No, no." He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Quite the opposite. I'm here to offer you something Jae-Sung never will. Freedom." I should have walked away. Should have called for the guards. Instead, I asked, "What are you talking about?" "You're a prisoner, Keisha. A beautiful, well-treated prisoner, but a prisoner nonetheless. He brought you to his home under the guise of protection, but really, you're leverage. Insurance. A tool he can use against his enemies." Lee moved closer, his voice dropping to a sympathetic murmur. "I've seen it before. He finds someone vulnerable, someone with a good heart, and he traps them in his world, makes them dependent on him until they can't imagine leaving." That's not what happened, isn't it? Think about it. You had a life, small as it was. Now you live in his fortress, surrounded by his guards, wearing clothes he bought, eating food he provides. When was the last time you made a choice that was truly yours? The words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. I had been trapped, in a way. Not physically, but by obligation, by gratitude, by the strange connection I'd developed with Mrs. Han and, if I was honest, with Jae-Sung himself. "I can offer you something better," Lee continued. "Money. Real money. Enough to disappear anywhere in the world. A new identity. Protection from both Jae-Sung and his enemies. All I need in return is information, his security protocols, his schedule, small things that won't even put him in real danger." "You want me to betray him. I want to save you from a life you never chose. You're a good person, Keisha. I can see it. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life entangled with a man who's killed more people than you've served meals? who will eventually drag you down into the same darkness that consumed his father. I thought about Mrs. Han's story, about how violence had transformed her husband from a good man into something cold and brutal. I thought about Jae-Sung's scarred knuckles, the blood on his clothes, the bodies I'd heard about but never seen. I thought about how easily I'd adapted to this world, how quickly I'd started accepting things that should have horrified me. "Why should I trust you?" I asked quietly. "Because unlike Jae-Sung, I'm giving you a choice. Real agency. You can walk away right now, go back inside, tell him about this conversation. He'll probably kill me or try to. Or you can take my card, think about it, and contact me when you're ready to be free." He held out a business card, plain white with just a phone number. No name, no logo. An escape route disguised as paper. I stared at it, my hand halfway to taking it, when I heard the terrace door open. Jae-Sung stepped out, his expression thunderous. His eyes went from me to Lee to the card between us, and something deadly settled over his features. "Step away from her," Jae-Sung said, his voice quiet and lethal. "Now." Lee smiled, unafraid. "We were just talking, getting to know each other. Your protection is quite impressive, Jae-Sung. Smart, brave, and apparently still naive enough to think she's here by choice." Jae-Sung moved between us so fast I barely saw him shift. One moment he was at the door, the next he was inches from Lee's face. "You have 5 seconds to leave this terrace before I throw you off it." "I'm going." Lee straightened his jacket, then looked at me one more time. "The offer stands, Miss Robinson. When you're ready to choose yourself over him, you know how to find me." He walked past Jae-Sung without flinching, disappearing back into the party. The guards at the door looked uncertain, waiting for orders. Jae-Sung turned to me and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. Not of Lee or violence or death, but of what I might be thinking. Of what I might choose. "Whatever he said," he started. "Is it true?" I interrupted. "Am I a prisoner here?" The question hung between us like a blade. Jae-Sung's jaw worked, emotions warring across his face. Anger, fear, something that looked dangerously like heartbreak. "I told you from the beginning," he said finally, his voice raw. "You could leave any time. I would protect you from a distance, but I wouldn't force you to stay." "That's not what I asked. Am I a prisoner?" "No." He moved closer, his dark eyes searching mine. "But I'm not naive enough to pretend your choices haven't been limited since the day I brought you here. I've shaped your world, controlled your environment, made you dependent on my protection. That's what men like me do. We build cages so comfortable that people forget they're caged." The honesty shocked me. I'd expected denials, justifications, the smooth manipulation Lee had warned me about. Instead, he was handing me the truth like a weapon I could use against him. "So he's right," I said quietly. "You trapped me. He's right about the cage. He's wrong about my intentions." Jae-Sung's hands curled into fists at his sides, like he was physically stopping himself from reaching for me. "I brought you here because you were the only person who proved they could keep my mother safe. But you stayed because you chose to. Every morning, you wake up and choose to care for her. Every night, you sit with her and make her laugh. You patch my wounds at 2 a.m. and tell me I'm an idiot for getting into knife fights. You stand up to men who could kill you without breaking a sweat. That's not captivity, Keisha. That's courage. Or Stockholm Syndrome. Maybe." His almost smile appeared, sad and self-aware. "God knows I've thought about it, wondered if I'm no better than Lee, just better at making the cage look like paradise. But then you do something like hiding my mother in a storage closet during an attack, or telling Director Kim he's all talk, and I remember why you're different. You're not here because I broke you down. You're here because you found something worth protecting." I looked out at the Seoul skyline, the city glittering like scattered diamonds, beautiful and deadly. 3 months ago, I'd been invisible, just another struggling foreigner in a city that didn't care if I lived or died. Now I was standing on a terrace in a designer dress, being courted by rival Mafia bosses, holding the fate of kingdoms in my calloused waitress hands. "Lee offered me money," I said. "Freedom, a new identity. All I had to do was give him information about you." Jae-Sung went very still. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing. Yet." I turned to face him and saw the fear in his eyes intensify. "Good, he should be afraid. He should understand that I had power here, That I wasn't just some helpless civilian he could control. I spent the last 2 hours at that party watching your world. The violence hiding behind champagne smiles. The alliances built on bodies. The casual way everyone talks about murder like it's just business. And you know what I realized? That you want out. His voice was flat, defeated. That I'm already part of it. Whether I stay or go, whether I betray you or protect you, I'm marked now. Lee knows it. Kim knows it. Every person in that ballroom knows it. The waitress who saved Han Jae-Sung is part of the story now. I can't go back to being invisible. Hope flickered in his eyes. So you're staying. I'm choosing. I stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the tension radiating from his body. Not because you trapped me, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because your mother calls me daughter and means it. Because you trust me with the only thing in this world you actually love. Because when I patched your wounds in that kitchen, I saw the boy in the photos, the one who existed before all this violence, and I want to protect him the way I protect her. His breath caught. Keisha. But I need something from you. I pressed a finger to his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath the expensive fabric. I need to matter. Not as your mother's caregiver or your weakness or your protection. I need to be your partner. When Lee tries to take you down, and he will try, I want to be the one standing beside you, not hidden away in some fortress. I want to use what I've learned, what I've seen, what I've become. I want to be your queen, not your prisoner. The word hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us was quite ready to face. But Jae-Sung's expression transformed, that careful mask cracking completely to reveal something raw and hungry and utterly human. My queen, he repeated softly, testing the words. Then his hands came up to frame my face, gentle despite their capacity for violence. Do you understand what that means? The target it puts on you? The choices you'll have to make? The things you'll have to live with? I survived Detroit. I survived your world's attempt to kill your mother. I survived that ballroom full of sharks who wanted to see me fail. I met his gaze without flinching. I think I can survive being loved by Seoul's most dangerous man. Loved. He said it like a confession, like something he'd been holding back for months. Yes, God help us both, but yes. When he kissed me, it felt like falling and flying at the same time, dangerous and inevitable and absolutely right. The party continued inside, oblivious. The guards at the door politely looked away, and somewhere in the ballroom, Lee Min-ho was realizing that his gambit had failed spectacularly. Because I hadn't chosen freedom, I'd chosen power. And there was nothing more dangerous than a woman who knew exactly what she was worth.